So we'll get started and hopefully a few more people will trickle in. I'm Dr. Marinelli. I'm with the Director of Advising with Med School Coach. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We're going to talk about today how to be an effective and successful pre-medical student. Probably all of you are aware that pre-med is a pretty rough track and it kind of only gets harder after this. So it's really all about right now establishing good habits, getting a good friend group, and making sure that you are really developing the skills to help you do well academically and also help you do well personally, because it is a long road and it is very important to have balance. So let's talk about that today. So we've got a couple awesome guests today. We've got Dr. Ziggy Yoediono, who is a psychiatrist. He's also one of Med School Coach's master advisors and has served on several admissions committees for medical school. Hi, Ziggy. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And then we also have Ken Tao, who is our director of MCAT advising, MCAT tutoring. Ken is all things MCAT. If you ever have any questions or need any knowledge or information about the MCAT, Ken is your guy. Thanks, Ken, for being with us.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here.
So I feel like the first question should be, how is everybody doing with daylight savings time? That I struggled today. I definitely noticed it. But instead, let's start with another poll. So if you guys could answer, when will you be applying to medical school? Just so we can get a feel of the audience out there, what people are actually thinking in regards to when they're getting ready. Okay, a couple more people can vote. All right, so I'll end the poll there. So most people are applying next year, a few people this year, and then some in a few years. I'm glad there's no one that's not sure. I should have clicked that one. Hopefully I don't ever have to reapply. But good, so this PowerPoint will definitely be for you guys all, because we'll kind of talk about those that are applying this year, those that are applying next year, and those that are applying in the next few years. So awesome, thank you guys. Let me go ahead and close this one. And also just a reminder, there's the Q&A, the chat function. Please feel free to write questions in there as we go along. At the end of the webinar and the presentation, we'll take a few minutes just to go around and answer different questions. So please feel free to start filling those in and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. Right now, I'm going to turn it over to Ziggy, who's going to talk about kind of going through this pre-med path and how you can go ahead and be successful through it.
Great, thanks so much, Renee. So to everyone, hi again. So I want to start off by saying, in my former life as a college academic advisor at Duke, there were two issues that my pre-med advisees almost always wanted to discuss. One was, what did medical schools expect in terms of prerequisites, along with the best way to plan these courses out? And the second thing was how to achieve a successful balance between academics, activities, and a social life. So in terms of medical school prerequisites, since it's almost the end of the academic year, most of you probably have a sense of what is required. But for those of you who may not, even though the requirements differ for each medical school, these are the classes which I have on the PowerPoint here that you should definitely be taking to make sure you cover all your bases. So as you can see, a year of general biology with lab, a year of general chemistry with lab, a year of organic chemistry with lab, a year of physics with lab, a year of math, and it can differ for each school, but usually this includes calculus, statistics, or some combination of both, a year of English, and biochemistry. Can I see thank you. So the key to getting top grades in your pre-med courses, as well as your other courses, is strategic planning. Since you also have major requirements as well as college ones to fulfill. So this is particularly relevant if you feel like you're not that strong in the sciences to begin with, which is something that I could definitely relate to when I was a college student. And because I also didn't like the classes to begin with, I took the bare minimum, which actually put more pressure on me to do well, since these were the only courses accounting for my science GPA. So because I didn't want to overwhelm myself with science courses, I made sure to stagger them over 3 years, which you can see on this slide, basically. And so freshman year, I took general chemistry with lab along with math and English. And then sophomore year, I took organic chemistry with lab and biology with lab. And then in my junior year, I took physics with lab. And this is just one way you can schedule it, but I can say it definitely worked for me. And as a result of sort of strategically planning, along with a lot of hard studying, I was able to get A's in most of my pre-med courses. So as you can also see on this slide, I've written the word organic chemistry in an ominous red hue, bolded it, and italicized it, and I have the word caution with a big fat red arrow pointing towards it. And the reason is because organic chemistry has a well-deserved reputation as being a weeder course. It's the course that prevents, I hate to say it, some medical students from applying or even getting in sometimes. And it's because it's very conceptually challenging for many people. So, my advice for that is to really prepare ahead of time. If you feel like that's going to be a hard course, maybe even the summer before, start reading ahead of time for this course. As you figure out what you're going to take when you're going to take your pre-med courses, it's also important to keep in mind that you want to finish them by the time you apply to medical school, which is usually the spring of your junior year. And there are 2 reasons for this. The first is most applicants take their MCAT, which Ken will be talking about. And these MCATs cover these prerequisites, and this happens during their junior year when they take the MCAT. The second reason is medical schools want to see your grades for these courses because it enables them to assess your proficiency. If you haven't finished the prerequisite before applying, the admissions committee then they can't evaluate your grade, and furthermore, they don't know for sure that you will complete it before matriculating. So completing the courses reassures them that you'll be ready to matriculate if offered a spot. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and I just want to say, Ziggy, I really like this outline here, and I think it's as far as the schedule, and as you said, there's 100 million different ways to organize your schedule, and it's really about what works for the individual student. But one thing I do like about this is it's kind of a stepwise approach. You have chemistry first, and most people will recommend taking Gen Chem before OChem. And then kind of math and English subjects that you're pretty used to taking in high school. And then you kind of step up to the harder organic chemistry in your sophomore year, along with biology and lab, and those kind of complement each other in some regards. So I think that this is at least a good stepwise approach and a good way for people to go about thinking how to kind of get those hard classes out of the way, but not overwhelm yourself initially when you start college.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I feel like this is probably one of the most important slides I'm going to be showing because this is something that everyone forgets about. So, this is one of the most important things that pre-meds often forget while taking pre-med courses because they're so busy just focusing on trying to get a good grade, which is making sure that they develop meaningful interactions with their professors. So this is important because when you apply to medical school, you need at least 2 strong letters of recommendation from science professors. And to get a strong letter of recommendation, you need to have had meaningful interactions with your letter writers. So one of the most common concerns I hear is that having a meaningful interaction with science professors, particularly for prerequisites, of course the helicopter's flying over right now, is not possible because the classes are so large. And so it's hard to distinguish yourself, other than getting a good grade. And this is a completely legitimate concern. And to that end, I have 3 recommendations, which I've briefly written up here. Number 1 is, take advantage of those office hours, particularly on a periodic basis, by coming in with legitimate, thought-provoking questions. And I say this is very important. If you're just coming in to chat and, ask questions, a professor can see right through that. And that's actually going to hurt you, if anything. The second thing is attend all review sessions. And again, have legitimate, thought-provoking questions. Even if you're doing well, still come into the review sessions because this really demonstrates genuine interest in the material. And the last thing is, if you're actually doing well in the class, try to become a TA. This is a great chance to interact with professors in more depth get additional responsibilities, and achieve meaningful results, which are the very kinds of things that you want detailed in your letter later on.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And the worst case scenario is the people that come to me like their junior year when they're applying that spring and they say, well, you know, I don't really have any science letters or any letters for that matter, just because my classes are 300 people and I've never really talked to any of my professors closely. And that's a huge red flag. And it's definitely something you want to think about early so you can cultivate those relationships. And then when the time comes, you walk into that professor's office and they're like, hey, Ken, good to see you. Like, what can I do for you today? And they're ready to go. And you know that, and you're confident that they're going to write you a good letter.
Exactly, exactly. All right, so the second major issue that my pre-med, as well as other advisees, often struggled with, particularly early on, was finding a successful balance between academics, activities, and a social life. And I found from talking with them, over the years, that the main contributing factor to their feeling unbalanced and overwhelmed was their academics, given the precipitous increase in difficulty and volume of work, basically. So compared to the relatively calm waters of high school academics, college academics often felt like a tsunami. And so therefore, the advice I'm going to be giving, focuses on academics mainly, because if you follow the steps I'm about to outline based on my experience, you automatically free up a lot of time to successfully engage in activities and to have a social life.
Yeah, awesome. I think we got,
yes.
There you
Perfect.
go.
So the first thing is, this is something I did, is, I know this sounds like a no-brainer, get a planner, please. Whether it's one you write in or a Google Calendar, this might seem like a no-brainer, but I remember one particular undergrad, super smart guy, who, when I asked him, I remember telling him he needed to do all of this stuff, and I didn't see him writing. And I asked him, so what are you doing? Like, how do you keep track of all of this stuff? And he actually said he just remembered them, and my eyes almost popped out, and I almost had a heart attack because I just felt like that was really not a good way to go. Please do not do this. Even if you have the memory of an elephant or photographic memory, there are a million things to keep track of in college. And no matter how great your memory is, some things are bound to slip through the cracks if you don't really take the time to write it down. And so once you get a planner, write down, this is what I used to do, write down every test, quiz, assignment, project, and paper that is due for that term. Assuming that you are taking about 4 to 5 classes, you will quickly see how much stuff that you have due, basically. And then for each thing that's due, put thought into when you want to start working on it and mark it down in your planner. And the key, I know, again, very obvious, is to start as early as possible, especially if you're starting college. Do not cling to those old high school habits of procrastination. There, you could get away with studying for a test or writing a paper the day before and getting a perfect A. In college, you will not be successful if you try that approach. And once you've decided when you're going to start preparing, you need to carefully plan out day by day exactly what you're going to do. For instance, let's say that you've decided you're going to start preparing for your next general chemistry exam, and it covers chapters 1 through 5, and that you're going to start studying 2 weeks in advance. Therefore, you need to write down when you're going to start studying each chapter, what practice problems you're going to do, and when you're going to review all of those chapters, basically.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we're going to do a quick poll after this, but I think that's a good point, just to make that everybody has slightly different skill set and slightly different way of going about things. I think I've probably in my lifetime bought 15 hard, copy planners that I'm gung-ho, I'm going to write everything down. I got stickers and pretty pens, to make sure that I'm staying, with my planner. And it goes for me about a week or two, and then I'm lost. But my iCal and my Google Calendar, those are my life. Like, if I don't have that, if my phone's not with me or I don't have my computer, I'm like, oh, I have no idea what I'm doing today. So it really is about, finding what works for you and then sticking with that system too. So let's do a quick poll to see people out there. How are you organizing yourself? So How do you prepare for your classes and your exams? Do you organize everything? Do you need that planner like Ziggy does? Do you procrastinate? I'm sure there's a few of us out there. I mean, do you kind of have a general idea of when you need to get things done or when things are due? All right, we'll give it just one more second here.
Yay.
Cool. So it's kind of a split across the board, but I'm a little, a lot of people have that planner, which is great. I mean, it's an awesome way to organize things. I would say for the 5% who procrastinate, definitely it kind of works in college, but as you know, Ziggy and Ken, when you're studying for the MCAT, it doesn't work in medical school.
No.
I remember fondly one time I procrastinated for an exam in medical school for the pharmacology section. I learned my lesson that first time. I thought I could, you know what? I'll study the pharm stuff the weekend before. I'll be fine. Nope. Bomb that one. So you quickly learn that lesson. So it's important to start developing these skills now.
All right, so the last thing I wanted to talk about in terms of balance is pre-med friends. So, in addition to good planning, you also need good friends to achieve balance in your life as a college student, and in particular, pre-med friends. So, I'm going to state the obvious, but being pre-med is a long and arduous path. So it's critical that you have a wide variety in terms of your support system, especially, of course, you have family and college advisors. But I would argue and say that one of the best support systems you can have is friends who are fellow pre-meds, because they are going through the exact thing that you're going through day by day, hour by hour, and therefore they can really relate more than anybody else, even sometimes compared to family, unless they've been pre-meds themselves, because they can relate to all the ups and downs of the journey. And this is not to say that you shouldn't have non-pre-med friends. Of course you should. But having just a few pre-med friends that you can trust will make your pre-med journey more successful in at least two ways. So one is in terms of academics. Everyone knows that pre-med courses are very challenging. But when you have fellow pre-med friends that you can study together with, you are much more likely to be able to overcome these challenges that you face, whether it's understanding concepts, solving problems, or in my case, it was figuring out lab instructions, which I could never do for some reason. Because everyone has different strengths and weaknesses. And sort of when you get together, it helps you overcome those issues. And the second thing is, from a more qualitative perspective, having pre-med friends can make having a social life less stressful in some ways, since they're also dealing with the same challenge of trying to find a healthy balance between academics, activities, and social life. And therefore, they're more likely to understand why you may not have as much time to hang out, or why you complain so much about organic chemistry. So that's all on my end, and I will turn it over to Renee and Ken.
Great. Thank you so much, Ziggy. That's awesome. Before I turn it over to Ken to talk a little bit about the MCAT and how you can start thinking about it now, and for those that are applying this year, if you haven't taken it, very important section. Please remember to use the polls and the questions after Ken is done. We'll go ahead and do like a roundtable Q&A, and we'll try to get to all your questions. So make sure you guys are still typing those in there. I appreciate it. All right, Ken, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, and I just want to add something to what Ziggy was saying. Having friends is definitely really helpful, not only for the academic courses, but also studying for the MCAT. We definitely have a lot of students that we work with that, ask, are there any study buddies that they could, be introduced to? And that definitely makes the process of studying for this exam much easier. So on this slide, we just have some general information about the MCAT exam if you're not familiar with it. It does have 4 different sections, each with a super long name, which I'll just abbreviate as the Chem Phys section, the Cars section, the Biochem section, and the Psych Soc section. Each section is scored between 118 to 132, so that's a 15-point scale. And a 125 in each section is an average score. So combined, that would mean a 500 is an average MCAT score, meaning that most students would be aiming to break 500 and essentially try to score as high as possible. As a standardized exam, it is nice for you to know about how this compares with other exams. So one important distinction with the MCAT compared to the other pre-health exams, the PCAT, DAT, OAT for the other pre-health schools, is that the MCAT is not just a bunch of freestanding questions. Those other exams, their science questions, are just, do you know this content? Have you memorized these topics or not? The MCAT is actually a far more difficult exam because it's a combination of passage-based questions and freestanding questions. And for the passage-based questions, you're going to be introduced to new situations and information that you've never seen before and be asked to apply your knowledge of science to that new information to answer those questions. And for that reason, one of the most important aspects of preparing for the MCAT is to do practice questions. And a couple of other minor points, the MCAT, it has a lot of questions, but all the questions are worth the same amount of points, and there is no guessing penalty.
A great point to remember. Quick poll here. So Ken mentioned that the average score is a 500. What is the average MCAT score for people that are actually getting into medical school? .505, 510, 515, 520. All right, so most everybody, the 43%, the majority got it right. So about 510 is the average for people that are getting into medical school. That's based on last year. So when we get data from this year, it may change a little bit, usually goes up 1 or 2 points each year. A 520, that would be shooting pretty high. That's a pretty rare score. Ken, the 520 is probably in the 95th percentile or somewhere around there.
That's the 99th percentile.
90,
so that
yeah,
would be a
so
pretty scary average score.
Yeah, very, very above average. But for people that are shooting for some of the top tier medical schools, Ivy League schools, Harvard, Stanford, things like that, a lot of people are shooting for that around that 520 because that is kind of where their median scores lie. All right, let me turn this off here, Ken, and I'll hand it back to you. So what is a good score?
So, yeah, so on the topic of the MCAT, Renee was discussing the average score, and yes, it is around 510. And changes slightly each year, but of course this is for the average pre-medical students. So we know that every student out there is unique in terms of your academic performance in your college courses, but also all of your activities and experiences. So here we actually have a nice chart that all of you can really follow along. You can essentially look at different GPA and MCAT score combinations to see what percentage of applicants actually get accepted into medical school. So you can see, for instance, a student who has maybe a 3.5 GPA, so that's between 3.4 and 3.59, and a 510 MCAT score, they'd have a 50% chance of getting into medical school. And of course, when you look at the numbers, you can see the higher the numbers, of course, the higher the chances of getting admitted, and the lower the numbers, the worse the chances are. One thing to take note of is between the GPA and the MCAT, the one that is a bit more forgiving is the GPA. So what I mean by that is you can see that there are some students with GPAs that are on the lower end, maybe low 3s, but if they're able to do really well on the MCAT, 514, 517, they can actually have a pretty good chance of getting into medical school. Whereas if you look at the opposite, students with very high GPAs but low MCAT scores, it doesn't work out quite as well. So the MCAT can save you a bit there, but ultimately both are important.
Yeah, great point there. That's a really great graph. And I share this a lot with applicants that I work with because it's just a really good way to kind of at least give them an idea of if they've already taken their MCAT or finished undergrad, where do they stand with their chances? And it's pretty realistic. Obviously, there's other factors taken into account when you're applying to medical school, but these are just good statistics to have. But then it also allows you to kind of shoot for what MCAS score you really want. Are you looking for a 510? Are you looking for a 517 based on your GPA? So it kind of helps position pre-meds on, exactly what they need to do to be successful and where they lie.
All right, so what I want to take a few moments to discuss is when to take the MCAT. And we get this question from students as well as parents all the time that aren't sure when a student should take the MCAT. And of course, it can be a bit tricky, as you all heard in the first half. Ziggy was talking about all these different commitments that you have to balance, and the MCAT is another beast that you have to throw in there as well. So I want to discuss 3 things that should help you to answer this question of when to take the MCAT. So the first part is to plan out your MCAT coursework. So on this slide, I have a list of the prerequisite courses for the MCAT exam, which really discusses all of the different subjects tested on the exam. So you can see general chemistry, organic chemistry, physics, biochemistry, biology, and introduction to psychology as well as sociology. And as you can note, there's a lot of overlap between the med school prereqs and the MCAT prereqs, which of course makes a lot of sense. The main thing that I would recommend for those of you who are earlier in your college careers, maybe freshmen and sophomores, is to start thinking about when you want to take these different courses. And that's just because, for instance, if you want to apply for medical school the summer after your junior year, then you'll likely want to take your MCAT sometime during your junior year, likely in the spring, or you really have to take it by the spring if you want to apply that summer. And if you want to take it by spring of your junior year, then your goal really should be to try to get through as many of these prereq courses as possible. So that way, when you're studying for the MCAT, you've already learned and are familiar with most of the content tested on the exam. Now, for the rest of you who aren't planning on applying directly into medical school, you're planning on applying after you graduate or taking additional gap years, then that's definitely less of an issue. And your main goal should just be to make sure to take all of these courses at some point during college.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The next thing you should consider is figure out a good time in your schedule where you're going to have lots of time to dedicate to the MCAT. So as you can see right here, the average pre-medical student spends 300 hours studying for the MCAT. And that's really quite a lot of time. And very often, this is students who are spending a summer focusing on the MCAT. So they're studying full-time, maybe 35 to 40 hours. You can see how they can get to 300 hours in about 2 to 3 months. Whereas for students who are studying during the school year and studying part-time, maybe 15, 20 hours per week, it'll take them more like 5 or 6 months to make sure they're fully prepared for the exam. Now, I do want to mention something here of why is it important to make sure that you have time dedicated specifically for the MCAT? And there's a couple reasons. So the first is that all students who are preparing for the MCAT, they won't have taken their prereq courses the semester before. So a lot of the courses, as Ziggy described, you're going to be taking early on, like in your freshman year. And by the time you're taking your MCAT in your junior year or later, it's been a couple years at least for some of those prereq courses. And you've definitely forgotten a lot of content, so you want some time to be able to review a lot of those topics that you learned a long time ago. Another aspect that's important is that the curriculum that you have at your college is not the same as the MCAT. So what that means is there's going to be some topics tested in your college courses that you don't have to know from MCAT. That can be a relief for some of you for some of those organic chemistry topics. But at the same time, it also means that there are going to be some topics that are tested on the MCAT that you haven't learned before in your college courses. So again, that's why it's important to make sure that you have a dedicated period of time where you can focus on topics that you need to know for the MCAT.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great point too, Ken. Just to, as a reminder, like those courses give you your foundation, but you really have to focus on studying for the MCAT and really focusing on how to synthesize that information together. And I think that was probably one of the things I struggled with. I thought it was just you needed to know the material, but really it's knowing the material, but then being able to apply it to certain situations. I remember I taught like an introductory biology course to undergrads after I had done it. And I thought, oh, I'm fine with this stuff. I really get it. But it wasn't when I started studying and taking practice questions, I realized, okay, I know the knowledge, but I'm not applying it correctly to the certain situations. And that was where I really needed to practice and gain those skills. And just for those of you out there, for whatever it's worth, don't just feel like you're learning these skills only for the MCAT. You're going to need these types of study skills all throughout your medical career, because this is exactly how the tests for the licensing exams are, is that you really need to know the material, but you also really need to be able to synthesize it, put it together, and apply it to specific situations.
All right, so last thing I want to talk about, and this part I've already referenced a bit, but you certainly want to make sure you take the MCAT before you apply for medical school. So generally the application season happens over the summer. So you can see here we have this diagram that sort of gives you some months where it is ideal for you to take the MCAT. I'll talk about it very briefly because I also want to mention that Dr. Mehta, one of our advisors and actually the founder of Medical Coach, actually has a full video of this on our YouTube page. So you should definitely check this out if you want to learn the details. But generally, taking the MCAT in April or May is ideal. So that way you have your MCAT score before you apply to medical school. However, you can still take the MCAT later. And here is where Medical Coach has a very convenient strategy for helping students be able to take the MCAT later, but still submit their application early without having their application delayed.
Awesome.
All right, so the last thing I want to talk about then is, okay, so you know that you need time to focus specifically on the MCAT exam, but how exactly should you prepare for the exam? And here, there are three key things that really all pre-medical students should be doing as part of their MCAT preparation. So the first part is content review. Again, you've forgotten a lot of the content, and there's some content that you need to know for the exam that you've never learned before. So you definitely need to spend some time reviewing the MCAT content that is tested on the exam. And generally, the best way to do this is to get a set of MCAT books from a test prep company, because their books are written to be focused specifically on the MCAT exam. The exact company of books that you use usually is not that big of a deal. More important is how you use the books. And by this, I mean that I have met a lot of students who have a set of MCAT books that they put on their shelf, and they basically stay on their shelf throughout their MCAT preparation, which is definitely not the best. The second part is, as I mentioned before, the MCAT is not a test of a pure memorization. It's a test of application. It's a recognition exam. So to learn how to answer the types of questions you see on the exam that are application-based, you really need to do practice questions. And there are many test prep companies out there that offer test prep questions, but the best questions by far out there are those written by the AAMC. And that's because all of the questions that the AAMC have released are all from previous MCAT exams. So they are the most representative questions available. And the last thing I also want to mention here is, in addition to doing practice questions, you want to make sure you do an intensive review of all the questions. And this is because a lot of students know that practice is important, but if all you do is practice questions and more practice questions, you'll often see your scores flatline and you won't see much of an improvement. The point of doing practice questions is to identify your weaknesses and figure out what you're doing wrong. So that way you can make adjustments as necessary. So that way you're not getting the same types of questions wrong. So often when students come to us looking for help with the MCAT, and they've been studying for a couple months and doing many practice tests and getting the same scores, often I ask them, what are you doing with your practice questions after each practice test you complete? And often they'll just say, oh, I read the solutions and made sense and then I moved on. But really what's more important is to not just read the solutions, be like, oh, I get it now, but really find out, why did I not get this wrong and what can I do differently? So when I see this type of question again, I will get it right.
That's such a great point. I mean, I think probably most people, if they don't know that, they just go through and just try to answer questions, as you said, just to practice answering the questions, but then they're also really looking to see what that number is. Where are they scoring? What is the progress that they're making? Instead of really looking at the problems and trying to figure out where they went wrong. And I can definitely attest to that. I did that multiple times for the MCAT, for the STEP exams, the USMLE. It took me a while to learn my lesson, but once I did, it made my studying much more effective. Thank you so much, Ken. That was an awesome overview of the MCAT and how to start thinking to prepare it. We have a few questions out there, but please, if you have more questions, start typing them now. We'll go ahead and take some time to do a Q&A. Also, definitely visit Med School Coach. So if you have any questions about applying to medical school, even if you are in high school and just even thinking about it, or if you're going to be applying this spring, reach out to us. We can help you along with the process. We have physician advisors that have served on admissions committees, so they really know what admissions committees are looking for in an application and can help package your entire application. Also, we have MCAT tutoring. As I mentioned earlier, Ken is our director of tutoring, MCAT tutoring. So he has put together an awesome curriculum. We have awesome tutors out there that can help you study for the MCAT. And then our sister website, Prospective Doctor, is just a free website with tons of information out there. Sometimes it can be hard to find reliable information as a pre-med, and we have just really dedicated this site for putting reliable, accurate information. So it has a school list creator, it has secondary prompts, there's blogs, there's a podcast, there's tons of stuff out there. So definitely visit Prospective Doctor for information. So let's get to some of these questions. So Ziggy, I'm going to throw this one out to you. Somebody asked, definitely good to have letters of recommendations written by your professors. However, what if you had a professor that didn't teach a class that you had a good connection with, like maybe a research mentor? Can you still use that letter?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because, so just to review the kinds of letters you need, you do need, we usually recommend that you get five letters. So 2 should come from a science professor, 1 should come from a non-science professor, and then 1 to 2 should come from can be people outside who are not professors, basically, whether it's a principal investigator that you did research for, maybe a doctor that you shadowed, or if you were part of some community service organization, the supervisor for that. So it's that last category that, if you have this kind of interaction that the person who asked the question about, and you feel like you've really worked with them pretty intensely, you have a great professional relationship, and you have, accomplishments and results that they would be able to write about in detail in the letter of recommendation, then by all means, you should ask that person, because, the quality of the letter is really important. You want that letter not just to be a ho-hum letter where they say like, oh, you were a great person, that's it, but something that can really help differentiate you from all the other people who are applying.
Absolutely. Someone just wrote a follow-up question and they said, is there a maximum number of recommendations I can submit? And does it hurt to have recs from my chem and organic chem professor rather than bio? So there actually isn't a limit that you can upload to AMCAS. I take that back. I believe it's 10 that you can upload to AMCAS to distribute to schools, but most schools have individual limits. So it's important to check those schools' individual limits to see what they are. Most of it is around 5. They don't want to see more than 5 letters of recommendation. And it definitely does not look bad to have a chemistry professor or physics professor rather than biology, as long as it's in the sciences and it's going to be a strong letter.
Yeah.
Here's one for you, Ken. So what kind of physics would you recommend for the MCAT? They asked general physics or introductory physics?
Yeah, so often at a lot of different colleges, there are different types of physics, and usually there's an easier version and a harder version. So for example, one common way that many schools have it set up is you have Physics 1 and Physics 2 for the life science majors. So these physics courses, the math isn't that complicated as compared to the harder version of the physics, which is often Physics 1 and 2 for scientists and engineers. So for this latter version, the math will be more advanced and will be calculus-based physics. For medical school, certainly either set of courses is fine. In terms of the MCAT, of course, if you take the harder courses, it will be better preparation for the MCAT. But it's kind of a double-edged sword there, because the harder courses will also be harder to get good grades in. So you can also think of that in the opposite way for the easy courses, that the easy courses will be easier to get good grades, but might not be as helpful in terms of MCAT preparation for the MCAT. So I would say for students that there's not really a right or a wrong answer choice here. I would usually just recommend whatever course is required for your major or recommended for your major. The one thing I will mention, though, in terms of physics requirement is you do need 2 semesters of physics, so both Physics 1 and Physics 2. So that's usually Newtonian mechanics and electricity and magnetism. This is a little different, for instance, from general chemistry and organic chemistry. So at some schools, they require a year of each as opposed to just 1 semester. And for general chemistry and organic chemistry, they only test the first semester content. So the second semester is really just a bonus, but not required for the MCAT.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Going off of that, Ken, and maybe you can answer this. So somebody said that their university combines the 2 semesters of OChem into 1. Will that be viewed negatively at all, or should they take another additional biochem or something in its place?
Well, if this is for medical school admissions, I think you and Ziggy can probably answer this better than I can. But for the MCAT, I would say that there's no issues there, that 1 semester of organic chemistry is more than plenty.
Yeah, and I would say from an admission standpoint, that's okay. I mean, it's what your university offers. And most of the time when you are applying to medical schools in the secondary application level, you will enter which prerequisites match, which courses you took that match that school's particular prerequisites, and you can just enter it that way and say, I have 1 semester, but it was the combined courses. So it shouldn't be a big deal when you are applying. This one is a little bit off the topic of what we had on this webinar, but I think it's a great question. Ziggy, do you feel that non-traditional students are viewed negatively during the application process?
No, I would say not at all. I mean, in fact, I think it can be a strength. I think if you're a non-traditional student, you really need, I think if it's something that that other people haven't done, you can actually kind of play it up in terms of your application and write about it. As long as you can talk about, how those strengths or how those experiences will apply to you're becoming a physician later. And also if you can talk about, if you're, for example, a career changer or something like that, if you have to be able to write and talk in a really good way, in a very convincing way about why you're making the switch, basically. And so I think if you can do those things in a very, adept manner, that it can actually work in your advantage and help you stand out even from the rest of the crowd.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's a great point. Somebody asked if I've taken courses, AP courses, and received credit for them that are prereqs, like let's say general biology, does that count? And excuse me, no. So this was an area where I got into trouble when I was in undergrad. I thought I had AP credit for English. I was like, oh, I'm good. Then it turned out my junior year, I had to, as a biology major, I had to back up and take an English class, which was, pretty inconvenient. I wasn't too happy about it. Turned out okay. But your AP courses, even if you've passed the exam and received credit in college, if those are for prerequisites, you should retake them. Most medical schools will not count AP credit as satisfied the course or the prerequisites for their schools. Hey, we talked about this a little bit, but Ken, maybe do you want to expand on it? What are some study methods you recommend for studying for some of these prerequisite courses?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I'd probably say there isn't a clear answer, as in there's not one study method that's going to work for all students. So my recommendation for students is really to try different things. And eventually you're going to find a method that works for you. So for instance, when it comes to reading textbooks or just learning content, some students can learn the content great from reading textbooks. Other students, not so well. The textbooks just, they don't absorb the information. So they have to really make sure they go to all of their lectures and courses and possibly watch the lecture recordings to learn the material. And for those students, I would also recommend these days, YouTube is a really fantastic resource. Just about any topic that you're learning in your organic chemistry or physics class that you're having difficulty with, if you just type that in the search bar, you can very quickly find some excellent videos explaining those topics and concepts very well. So the point is, try different things. And another example of that is, let's say you're doing reading for a course. So some students, they can just do the reading and they're fine. But other students will find that they get more out of the reading if they highlight while they read. Or other students feel that they need to take notes while they read. And all of those can be fine. It's really, you want to find one method that works well for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, awesome. So a couple people had asked about transfer credits, like they maybe started some of their courses at a community college and then transfer to university. Somebody asked specifically, how would my GPA be calculated? So the GPA from your university or the courses from your university and from the community college will be all calculated as a whole for your undergraduate total GPA, and that will be broken down into your science GPA and then all of your other courses together. So there's really no separations between the community college and the university, except that it's going to have, you're going to enter those as different colleges, and when they see all of your grades, they'll be able to see which courses you took where. But as far as the GPAs, they'll be all lumped together. Somebody also asked, and I'll talk about this, that I took some science classes at my community college, but I didn't really develop a relationship with my science professor. So what should I do in order to try to get letters of recommendation? So if you're taking other science courses, try to develop that relationship now. It doesn't have to be from one of those core prerequisite science courses. You can get a letter of recommendation from, marine biology. It can be really from any science course. So try to develop those relationships now. If you're unable to get a letter of recommendation from a science professor, then what I would say is look at each individual school's website, and they do have instructions on there for people that aren't able to get those traditional letters. You can substitute them with different letters, but each school has their own specific requirement on that. Ziggy, can you answer, what are your thoughts on gap years?
Oh, well, I think it depends on why you're taking the gap year. A gap year can be a great thing to do if you do it for the right reason. So for instance, if you've gone through your 4 years of college and you realize there's some kind of missing parts in there that medical schools would traditionally like to see, such as, clinical experience, shadowing a doctor. If you're interested in research and you haven't gotten to do the research, you can utilize your gap year to sort of supplement what you were missing during your time in college. And if you use that year in a really productive way, and, like for instance, if you're doing research, you decide to use that year to do research and you're able to get like a paper published out of it, do some presentations, then I think medical schools would really look upon that gap year in a very favorable way. And it'll show that you took the time to strategize about how you wanted to use that year because you're really committed to going to medical school. So I think it can be a very positive thing if used in the right way.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And I'm going to follow up on that question. Somebody asked, pre-meds are expected to volunteer and shadow and do all research and things like that. But what if we work in a non-medical related job, like at a grocery store or a hotel or something like that? And how is that viewed? And honestly, it's okay to work. Some people have to work, and there's no way around that. If you are taking a gap year, I would say try to work in something that's going to be productive for your application. So maybe scribing, clinical research, working at a medical facility, an EMT. So maybe try to have your job be kind of killing two birds with one stone, so to speak, where you're not only making money to support yourself, but you're also using that time to be productive and add to your application. Otherwise, if you just have a part-time job or something during undergrad and you're still doing all those other activities, that's not viewed negatively at all. They absolutely understand that some people are going to have to balance other commitments, and actually can be viewed positively because there's a lot of things that people learn from work experience, like responsibility, commitment, honesty, integrity. All of those great qualities are often gained from work experience. Ken, here's one for you. So someone is planning to take organic chemistry this summer, and that's about 8 weeks long. Any thoughts on taking a quick OChem?
Yeah, so it's not going to be fun, but it certainly can be done. The one thing you want to consider is that usually during the school year, so during the fall or spring semester, a typical organic chemistry class is going to have 3 hours of lecture and a 3 to 4 hour lab. When you condense that to 8 weeks, you essentially double that. So that means you're looking at 10 hours long lecture and 2 3 to 4 hour long labs each week. So it's a lot of content that you're going to be encountering very quickly. So if you're doing a lot that summer, like if you're doing research, volunteering, that can be a lot to juggle at the same time. So my recommendation is try to take it a little lighter so that way you can focus more organic chemistry. Definitely use all the opportunities that you can to go to office hours to ask questions so that you can make sure you stay on top of the material as well as you can.
Awesome. Ziggy, here's one for you. What area is best to focus on when it comes to extracurricular activities, shadowing, community service, other ones? Is there one you should focus on?
Oh, it's like trying to choose like your favorite child. I mean, you kind of have to do all of them. I would say, definitely clinical experience and shadowing, because think about it. I mean, let's do some reverse engineering. What is the point of going to medical school, right? It's about patient care, interacting with patients and all that kind of stuff. So if you haven't demonstrated intensely throughout college that you've interacted with patients, then medical schools are going to have a hard time believing that you're really, being genuine about it. And the main ways that you get this kind of interaction are through clinical experience and through shadowing. With research, I would say that's, maybe people feel differently, I would say that's a little bit less important if you're not into research at all. If you don't want to go to a research-oriented medical school, or you just feel like you don't want to do that ever in your whole life, then it would make sense that you wouldn't do that. But then you want to compensate by that by focusing on other areas. So I would definitely say like the clinical experience and the shadowing are the two things that you really need to focus in on.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. Somebody asked, what courses would you recommend retaking? I think this is a great question. Like which prereq, if I had a C or below, can I leave that on my transcript? There's not a perfect answer here, but I usually recommend if somebody has a C or below in a prerequisite course, that's grounds to retake it, because they're just taken into account and they're so important. And not only do you need to know that material, you really want to prove to medical schools that you have the academic capabilities to do well in some of those tough science courses. So if you have a C, it's really hard for them to judge, was that just a fluke, or are they not able to handle this content? So I think as a C or below is probably a good, definitely below a C, you need to retake it, but at a C level, you would, ideally want to retake it and at least get above a B, hopefully an A. A B plus would be great, but closest to an A is going to really increase your chances and look much better. Ken, here's one for you. Math was mentioned as one of the prereqs. Will both calculus and stats be on the MCAT?
Yeah, so I can tell you there is no calculus at all on the MCAT. The level of math you can expect would be to do multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, also exponents and log math for things like pH calculations. Stats, yes, there is a little bit of statistics. This is mainly in the psychology and sociology section of the exam. So you do need to know some of the basics like independent and dependent variables, sample size, random sample, but it's really quite basic. So these are topics that you could easily review just by reading a chapter in an MCAT book. So you certainly don't have to take a whole semester of statistics before taking the MCAT.
Yeah, awesome. Here we go, Ziggy. Can you include, and I think we get this one a lot, can you include activities from your senior year of high school?
I would try not to do something like that unless you have absolutely nothing in college to talk about, but which you should. Medical schools really care about what you've done during your time in college, basically, and not before. So, the short answer is I really wouldn't do that. I would really focus on stuff that you've done in college. That's what they're going to care about the most, and that'll show the most initiative in terms of, wanting to go to medical school.
Yeah, I agree. And we do get this question a lot, and I usually recommend no, don't put those high school activities on there unless, like Ziggy said, you don't have anything else, or maybe they were very recent or very, very significant. So like if you did something that was, you dedicated all of high school through and it was a really big deal, then yeah, you could include it. Or if you continue that activity into college. So if you maybe volunteered somewhere and then you continued it into college, I think that's totally appropriate to include. But in general, you want to stray away from using those activities. Let's see, we got time for a couple more questions. Ken, here's one for you. And I know this is a little bit with admissions too, but someone wants to take their MCAT in mid-June so they have more time to study after finals. How does that affect them with their chances of admission and submitting their application?
Yeah. So the first thing is I also noticed that they wanted to have a month to be able to focus on the MCAT after the finals. And I think that's a fantastic idea because while it's important to apply early to medical school, if you rush the MCAT and end up getting a bad score, then that would be worse. And in terms of the timeline that the student is considering, taking the MCAT in mid-June is not considered particularly late. That in viewing the entire medical school admission cycle, taking the MCAT in the middle of June, it's still fairly early. So I don't see any issues with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, one of the ways that you really want to do that, if you take it in mid-June, you get your score in mid-July, have your application submitted in mid-June, but submit it to one school. So what that does is it allows your application to get processed, gets verified, and then once you get that MCAT score in mid-July, you can go ahead and add in medical schools, and it will automatically be sent to them. There won't be any delay in that processing time. So it helps cut back by a few weeks of delay in your application. Probably just a couple more questions here. Can you send in more than one MCAT score to your schools? Like in high school, can you super score your ACT? So all of your MCAT scores are reported to medical schools. So even if you've taken it multiple times, every medical school that you apply to will see those multiple scores on your applications. Here's one for you, Ken. Somebody is going to do an MPH. And it's a dual degree program. It will start their senior year. Should they take the MCAT before or after getting their master's?
Yeah, so I would say that it depends on the specific master's programs. In this case, if you're looking specifically at a master's of public health, generally these courses don't help as much with the MCAT exam. You might have a couple courses like epidemiology that might help with some of the topics. But in your situation, I would say the coursework in your MPH isn't going to have much of an impact on your MCAT preparation. So in your case, you could take it before or after, and I think that's fine. I'd say it more so just depend on your availability to prepare for the exam. For other students, for instance, that are doing special master's programs or post-bac programs that, for instance, are on first-year medical student classes, then for many of these students, it's better for them to take the MCAT after the program because they'll be taking courses like biochemistry, physiology, pathology, and so forth with content that is relevant for the MCAT.
Awesome. Well, it's a little after 7 here, so let's go ahead and wrap up. There's still some questions out there, but check us out on perspectivedoctor.com, medschoolcoach.com. Feel free to email us. We're definitely here to help you along the way. And awesome questions. Thank you so much, Ziggy and Ken, for participating. And hopefully we get to work with everybody soon.
All right.
Thanks,
All right,
guys.
bye.
Bye.
Good night.